Herod the Great was a giant of the ancient world. A powerful king, he ruled the land of Judea for over 30 years. His legacy includes fine architecture and impressive engineering. But it's the killing of the children that has earned Herod his reputation as a tyrant. Matthew explains in his Gospel how the crime took place. Travelers from the east journeyed to King Herod's palace in Jerusalem. Matthew calls them wise men. They had seen a star, a sign that a new king of the Jews had been born. This news troubled Herod. He was king of the Jews. Herod's high priest warned him of a prophecy that a king would be born in the town of Bethlehem. Herod asked the wise men to return and tell him where the child was. Warned in a dream, the wise men secretly made their way home by a different route. When the wise men didn't return, Herod flew into an uncontrollable rage. According to the Bible, he had planned to kill Jesus and had failed. Herod ordered the killing of every child in Bethlehem under the age of 2. But there was at least one boy who escaped. Joseph and Mary had taken their son and fled to Egypt. The massacre is described in just one verse in the Bible. A single verse has grown into one of history's most infamous crimes. But the evidence that Herod ordered these murders is incredibly thin. In fact, the story is not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. In researching Herod's life, historian Peter Richardson has checked for any references to a mass murder of children.
I think it is important that even within the New Testament, only Matthew tells the story, and Luke, who tells of other incidents surrounding the birth of Jesus, told from a quite different point of view, in fact, in Luke. Luke knows nothing of this incident.
Luke isn't the only writer who fails to mention the massacre. No other records of it have been found. The Jewish historian Josephus lived in the 1st century AD. He wrote about Herod and Jesus, yet he makes no reference to the killing.
Josephus knows nothing of this incident. I think we have to simply grant that there is very little evidence for it. We have only Matthew's account, and that should make us just a little bit suspicious about the details of the story.
One verse in the Bible, one piece of evidence, is hardly enough to convict Herod. But there's another way to investigate the killings. By focusing on Herod himself rather than the historical records, it may be possible to establish if he had the motive and the capability for the crime. Josephus wrote in detail about Herod's actions and even his feelings. He got much of his information from Nicholas of Damascus, Herod's prime minister and court historian. With such rich source material, modern psychology can shed light on Herod's character and personality.
Josephus, in the biography of Herod, pays very close attention, unusually close attention, I think, to psychological facts of Herod's life, his paranoia, his violence, his melancholia, and also his greatness. So we get a lot of psychological detail in the biographical portrait of Herod, and that's essential to make sense of Herod's life.
So was Herod ruthless enough to commit this crime? Josephus provides illuminating information about his early life. Herod's father was Prime Minister of Judea, a Roman province at the time, and a close friend of Julius Caesar. His mother was an Arab princess from Petra, in present-day Jordan. Herod was born into a privileged world and had an early introduction to the power politics of his age.
In Herod's family, he grows up with names at the table that his grandfather and his father have rubbed shoulders with. Pompey, Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, Octavian, Cleopatra, Brutus, Cassius, all of the great names are names right at the table.
Herod's own rise to power was fast. At 25, he was appointed governor of Galilee. He married a woman called Doris, and they had a son. His life and career were taking off. But Josephus writes that shortly after this, Herod's life took a fateful turn. Returning from a successful military campaign, he was made a tantalizing offer. Betrothal to a beautiful teenage girl who was of Jewish royal blood, Princess Mariamne. Mariamne represented a golden opportunity for Herod. She was from the royal family most Jews regarded as the rightful rulers of Judea. Marrying her would be a powerful alliance for Herod. There was just one problem. He already had a wife and son. Josephus writes that Herod acted decisively. He banished Doris and their 3-year-old son. He went ahead with the betrothal and married Mariamne. The Romans clearly saw Herod as a man after their own hearts. 5 years later, they named him King of the Jews.
He wants what he wants. Nothing's going to stand in the way of what he wants. He's going to get what he wants. He's very single-minded in that respect.
Herod was ambitious and unscrupulous, but that's hardly grounds enough to condemn him as a child killer. In fact, a very different side of his character emerges from a number of archaeological finds made in Israel over the last few decades. They reveal a king with sophisticated tastes, whose legacy as a great builder belies his reputation as a murderer.
Guys, it's breakfast time.
Just south of Bethlehem are the remains of an architectural wonder conceived and designed by Herod. It's Herodium, a desert palace built by Herod, which, according to archaeologist Jody Magnus, is a testament to his engineering genius. She has excavated inside Herodium and identified its unique design.
There are actually two palace complexes at Herodium. There was a palace or palace buildings on top of the mountain, sort of in the mouth of the volcano, if you wish, and a palace complex at the foot of the mountain. And that complex includes an enormous pool that had a pavilion in the middle of it, and the pool would have been used for swimming and perhaps even for boating, and was supplied by aqueduct from springs that were located some miles away.
The sheer scale of Herodium has become apparent in the last 30 years, thanks to the work of archaeologists like Ehud Netzer. He discovered royal apartments, guest rooms, bathhouses, arcades and gardens where Herod could entertain his family and his entire court.
A typical day of Herod at Herodium would maybe he started with swimming. There was a large swimming pool. The morning is very pleasant in the summer to swim. I guess after a good breakfast, he would meet many of the friends. It seems that the site accommodated dozens, if not hundreds, of family members, and no doubt maybe some nice dinners and a lot of wine from Italy.
Herodium wasn't unique. "40 miles to the south, by the shores of the Dead Sea, is the most impressive of all Herod's palaces, Masada. It towers 1,000 feet above the Judean desert. Three stories high, the palace is a sensational feat of building. Josephus writes that Herod was directly involved at every stage in the design and the location of his buildings. Achievements like this suggest a highly cultured man, a judgment that's difficult to square with his reputation as a child killer. But there's more than meets the eye at Masada and Herodium. Both palaces say much about Herod's state of mind. What's striking about Masada is that it's more than just a palace. Built on a treacherous mountain in a vast desert, it is an unassailable fortress. A place where Herod could feel safe. It seems the king was terrified of something, and excavations here have revealed the depth of his insecurity. Archaeologists have unearthed large storage rooms for food. The water cisterns are the biggest ever discovered from the Roman Empire. Herod had prepared Masada to withstand a very long siege.
Well, we know that in addition to storing food and water on top of Masada, that Herod also stored an arsenal of weapons. We do know also that Herod, of course, had soldiers stationed on top of the mountain, and in fact, after he died, the mountain continued to be occupied by a small garrison of soldiers.
Even the family palace of Herodium is deceptive, for it too is in fact a fortress, another place born of deep insecurity. The steep sides meant Herod could defend it with just a few soldiers. Precisely how was revealed when archaeologists found these huge stones at its base.
The big stone, we call them rolling stones, nothing to do with pop music. We call them rolling stones, and this is if a group of soldiers would try to go as a group up, or few ones, you roll them from top, and then it's very frightening as well as effective if it hits the people.
Herod's fear was so strong that he built more than 20 fortresses across his kingdom. Signals could be sent between the fortresses with mirrors.
They mirror the architecture of his paranoid mind. He had these deep fears of being attacked, of being vanquished, of having his titles taken from him. And the buildings speak to that fear quite directly.
Perhaps Herod felt so threatened that he would even kill the children of Bethlehem to protect his interests. But what was he so afraid of? Documents from the period reveal a widespread desire among Jews for a different kind of king. They believed a great leader, a Messiah, would be chosen by God to overthrow Herod and become the true king of the Jews. Biblical historian Warren Carter has studied the expectations of the times. In Herod's day, everyone knew the scriptures and their prophecies.
We do know that in some Jewish traditions during the time of Herod, there was some expectations among some people of a Messiah. We have some psalms written in the name of Solomon that look for a king in the line of David who will come to Jerusalem and without using military means will somehow expel the Romans. Herod was aware of these expectations and was aware of the threat that they posed.
The Jews had every reason to question Herod's claim to be their legitimate king. They expected their king to be a full-blooded Jew, and many were suspicious of Herod's Jewish origins.
Herod's Jewishness comes from the conversion of his grandfather. Herod thus is a third-generation Jew, and he acquires his commitment to Judaism as a result of that conversion process rather than through bloodline. Herod himself did not have a drop of Jewish blood in him, though he was Jewish by religion.
In fact, Josephus wrote that much of the population looked down on Herod, especially those from old families. This is why Herod married Princess Mariamne. As a member of the Jewish royal family, she strengthened his claim to the title King of the Jews. Fear of his subjects explains why Herod built such an unusual network of fortresses across his kingdom.
Herod fortified Masada and other palaces as a sort of a fortification system against an internal threat, his Jewish population, because the Jewish population did not like him, did not accept him as a legitimate king, and he lived his life in fear that one day they would rise up in revolt and try to kill him.
Herod was clearly worried. There's evidence that he went out of his way to flatter his Jewish subjects. He worked hard to gain popularity and public approval. This is the Western Wall, one of the oldest landmarks in Jerusalem. Jews from all over the world come here to pray. This wall is all that's left of a spectacular building masterminded by Herod. Precise descriptions by Josephus have allowed architects to recreate the entire building. It is the Temple of Jerusalem, and it was Herod's idea. The temple was hailed by many at the time as the most beautiful building in the world. It was a very public attempt by Herod to win the hearts and minds of the Jewish people.
Now, because there could only be in Judaism one temple building, the one in Jerusalem, therefore, by definition, that was, of course, a very important building because the entire Jewish religion was centered around that single building. We do know that it was a very large and magnificent building with marble and gold, and that it was surrounded by its own courtyard with towers and fortification walls.
$18,000 workers were employed, and more money was lavished on the temple than on any other building in the history of Judea.
We're told in one of the Jewish sources that God so favored this project that it only rained at night during the years of the building of the temple, but every day was a sunny, dry day so that the project could proceed unhindered.
During the construction work, Herod took great care to show respect for Jewish sensibilities.
On the human front, it was important that the temple not be defiled during the time of the rebuilding. And in order to get around that, Herod had priests trained in all the relevant building technologies as masons, as carpenters, and so on. There's no question that Herod rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem in order to solidify his reputation with the Jewish people.
With such public devotion to the Jewish faith, Herod should have won the approval of his people. But despite everything he tried, Josephus says that many still despised him. The roots of this hatred are not hard to trace. Although Herod was king of the Jews, he had been appointed by an occupying power, the Romans. And to make things worse, he pandered to them at every opportunity. In his next building project, Herod took a step that caused great offense to the Jewish population and swept away any remaining traces of goodwill. Herod's new project lies 60 miles northwest of Jerusalem and was once known as the Jewel of the Mediterranean. It is an entire city and seaport. This aqueduct, which supplied fresh water, is one of the best preserved structures. But in naming the city, Herod delivered the highest insult to his Jewish population. He named it Caesarea, in honor of the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus. Its amphitheaters and arenas were packed with Roman entertainments despised by Jews as decadent and immoral.
Herod's hippodrome in Caesarea was for horse races, perhaps chariot races, but also could be used for gladiatorial games, battles with animals, between humans, those kinds of bloody spectacles. This was the bloody underside of Roman civilization.
Then Herod committed the unforgivable. He built a temple, not to the God of the Jews, but to a Roman god, the emperor. He even funded a vast harbor with proceeds from Jewish taxes. Little of it survives today, but from the air it's still possible to make out the foundations of this sophisticated piece of engineering. Architect Christopher Brandon has been carrying out underwater archaeology that is revealing the true scale of Herod's harbour.
What you first see is basically a reef. You think it's just a natural reef. And then you start to see beam impressions, post holes, and you start to realize that this is not a natural feature. This is a man-made structure.
Herod used a revolutionary building technique that had just been invented by the Romans.
Herod constructed this harbour by floating out wooden boxes which were sunk in a line by filling them with concrete. All it was is an enclosing wall which was always filled with water. So the concrete was poured into the water and set within the water. They formed a solid foundation on which he could then build the rest of the piers that actually formed the harbour itself.
In the final analysis, Herod's sympathies lay with the Romans. No wonder Jews challenged the legitimacy of his kingship. No wonder he felt insecure. It would certainly give him a motive for murdering the children of Bethlehem. But was Herod actually capable of such a barbaric crime? The first indication of just how far he would go came when he was 38 years old. In 35 BC, Herod appointed a new high priest at the temple in Jerusalem. The high priest was second in power only to the king. Under pressure from his wife Mariamne and from her mother, Herod appointed his brother-in-law, the 17-year-old Aristobulus. But Herod worried that powerful Jewish families might form an alliance against him and back Aristobulus, a full-blooded Jew, as king. Then, at a party at Herod's palace, Aristobulus was mysteriously drowned. Few believed that it was an accident, and Josephus was convinced that Herod had had the young man drowned.
Here we find Herod ordering the drowning of Mariamne's brother Aristobulus. And this tells us first that Herod's paranoid, and secondly that he's capable of murder, even though the evidence is rather circumstantial.
The evidence would hardly stand up in a court of law, but there was worse to come. Five years later, Rome had a new ruler. Octavian had defeated Mark Antony. Herod immediately switched his allegiance from Mark Antony and went to pledge his loyalty to Octavian. Josephus says Octavian was impressed and confirmed Herod as king of the Jews. This was a risky step for Herod. He left Jerusalem fearing Octavian's retribution for supporting his enemies. In fact, Herod left secret orders for his wife, Mariamne, to be killed if he did not return alive. Josephus writes that he could not bear the thought of her being with anybody else.
The relationship between Herod and Mariamne was, by all accounts, volatile, intensely volatile, one might say. It was not, as Josephus put it, of a calm nature. Herod was deeply in love with Mariamne. His love was intense and passionate.
On his return, Herod was horrified to discover that Mariamne had learned of his plans to have her killed. Their marriage fell apart. She stopped sleeping with him.
I do feel in his heart of hearts that Herod may have slightly resented Mariamne for not loving him with the intensity that he loved her. But that again reveals something about Herod, I think, the fact that he has a very difficult time comprehending other people's emotions, almost as if his view of the world is that everybody should accede to his wishes and be what he wants them to be.
Increasingly jealous, Herod put Mariamne on trial. Mariamne was brought before her own husband on a trumped-up charge of adultery. The penalty was death. Herod's sister, Salome, was the chief witness against her. Mariamne's mother, Alexandra, made a dramatic appearance at the trial and testified against her own daughter. Josephus saw this as a reflection of Herod's hold on Alexandra. She too was on his death list and probably incriminated her daughter to save her own life. Herod declared Mariamne guilty and ordered her execution. She was just 25 years old and had given him 5 children in 7 years. Josephus writes movingly that Mariamne was calm and serene as she went to her death. If Herod could kill his own wife, then perhaps he could murder rivals for his throne.
I see the turning point in Herod's life without doubt being his ordering of the murder of Mariamne, and he begins down the avenue of his ruin from then on. I think the ordering of that murder determines a lot of his psychological life from then on. It determines a lot of his motives from then on.
But Herod might argue, in mitigation, that the killing of Mariamne was not a cold-blooded murder, but a crime of passion. And indeed, Josephus reports that Herod grieved for her loss. Apparently, Mariamne's death tore Herod apart. He was consumed with remorse and refused to believe she was dead. He wandered the palace, calling her name.
It does, to some degree, redeem Herod's character. He's not thoroughly unlikable. He is capable of love. He is capable of grief. He is absolutely undone by her death. And so we feel more warmly towards him because we don't see him as this vile beast any longer. We see him as this suffering person.
While the killing of Mariamne doesn't make Herod a mass murderer, Josephus records that it did push him dangerously close to the edge.
He's psychotic. He's hearing voices. He's deeply depressed. He's incapable of carrying on public affairs any longer. So this is a true psychotic break. It's a definite turning point, and it cements his fate.
Herod was by now seriously ill. His behavior was erratic, and there were reports of heavy drinking. His enemies sensed he was losing his grip on the country. Some even thought he'd lost his mind. For the first time, there was a bold attempt to seize his throne. The way Herod reacted gives the clearest indication yet of whether he could kill in cold blood. With Herod lying ill, Mariamne's mother made a wild bid for power. Alexandra declared herself queen, proclaiming that the king was no longer mentally fit to rule the country. Josephus says she made a fatal mistake. Her action brought Herod out of his lair, fighting. Without so much as a trial, he had Alexandra executed. But that only served to increase the risk of a coup. When he was 65, Herod's constant fears were confirmed when he heard that his two sons from his marriage to Mariamne were plotting to assassinate him and seize the kingdom. These were his own sons, from the woman he had loved.
It's good to remember that Herod, in the later part of his life, was completely unhinged. He believed in solving problems through violence. He was also deeply paranoid. So when rumors are flying about possible efforts on the part of his son to seize power from him, Herod falls back on the behaviors that have worked for him psychologically in the past.
Herod decided to act. He had his two sons executed. In this same year, just 8 miles away, in a manger in Bethlehem, a woman named Mary gave birth to a baby she called Jesus. When the wise men arrived at Herod's court, they met a king who had killed his wife and murdered her brother and her mother. Just months before, he had also killed 2 of his sons. If Herod could kill his own children, it doesn't require a great leap of faith to believe that he could also have killed the children of Bethlehem. But if he did, the mystery is why such a horrific episode is reported only in the Gospel of Matthew. Why is the story absent from all other contemporary historical sources? Some scholars now believe that despite everything we know about Herod's paranoia and brutal crimes, there was in fact no massacre in Bethlehem. They believe two different accounts of the killing of children got confused in the retelling of the story through the ages.
I find it very suggestive that the birth of Jesus and the execution of two of Herod's children may have taken place in the very same year. One of the things that might be happening in the Christian story about the massacre of the innocents at Bethlehem is that the horror of a father executing two of his own children has got transferred into the story of the birth of Jesus and has become the story of the execution of a bunch of children at the time of the birth of Jesus.
There's another possibility. Perhaps the massacre did take place, but the historian Josephus deliberately left it out.
It's possible because Josephus is interested in the important people, the powerful people, kings and successors and rivals and allies, and a little event in a nowhere town like Bethlehem with little people is not something that is particularly important in the grand scheme of things. So it could be that it fell through the historical cracks in that way.
But the massacre of children, even in a small town, is certainly worthy of some notice. The Gospel of Matthew does not say how many children were killed. Later accounts, however, insist that the numbers were huge. The Greek Orthodox Church says Herod killed 14,000 boys. The Syrian Church speaks of 64,000. And later, medieval authors went as far as 144,000. But maybe the massacre was not on the scale that any of those traditions suggest. Biblical historian Olu Peters approached this question by looking again at Matthew's account of the killings in the original Greek.
The word massacre at times connotes the idea of thousands of people that may have been killed. But if you go back to the Gospel of Matthew, the word that is used there is anaireo. That's the Greek word, not to be translated as massacre, but as the killing of infants. That word can be used for even the killing of one person. So the word as it is used in Matthew does not give you the idea of thousands being killed.
In fact, demographic clues from first-century Palestine reveal that Bethlehem was a small village with a population between 300 and 1,000. At any given time, the number of babies under the age of 2 would be only between 7 and 20. So numbers alone may be the reason why Josephus does not mention the murders. That's still not enough evidence to convict Herod beyond a reasonable doubt, but he certainly had the motive and the cold-blooded capability.